God rest him wherever he is. I know that his wife is working out some sort of an agreement now with the University of Texas.
For over 4 decades, Linda Moulton Howe has been one of the most persistent investigative journalists in the United States. In the early 1980s, she began investigating a deeply strange phenomenon that was being reported across the American Midwest. Farmers were finding their cattle dead in fields, with no blood, no tracks, and surgical precision cuts on their bodies that seemed impossible to explain. Law enforcement had no answers. The government had no answers. But Linda kept digging, and what she found led her directly into a world of classified documents, government cover-ups, and eventually some of the most extraordinary claims ever made about life beyond Earth. What nobody could have predicted, though, was that decades later, all of that work would lead her to one place, the most remote frozen continent on the planet, Antarctica. Most people think of Antarctica as just ice, a barren, frozen wasteland at the bottom of the world where scientists study weather patterns and penguins walk around unbothered. It does not seem like the kind of place that would change human history, and that is exactly what makes it so suspicious. Antarctica is roughly the size of the United States and Mexico combined. It holds about 70% of the world's fresh water locked inside its ice sheets. Some parts of that ice are nearly 3 miles thick. And here is the thing that most people do not realize. We have explored less of Antarctica than we have explored the surface of Mars. It is genuinely one of the least understood places on Earth. But Antarctica has a strange history that goes beyond scientific research. In 1947, the United States Navy launched a massive military expedition to Antarctica called Operation High Jump. It was led by Admiral Richard Byrd, and it involved 4,700 men, 13 ships, and multiple aircraft. The official reason given was scientific exploration, but the scale of the operation looked nothing like a science trip. It looked like a military invasion of an empty continent. The expedition was originally planned to last 6 to 8 months, but it was abruptly cut short after just 8 weeks. Admiral Byrd himself gave a press interview in Chile on his way home, where he spoke about encountering a threat that could fly from pole to pole at incredible speeds. That interview was largely buried and forgotten. Then in 2016, something happened that reignited global interest in Antarctica. Leaked satellite images appeared to show what looked like large geometric structures beneath the ice. Scientists debated whether they were natural rock formations or something else entirely. And then some very unusual visitors started making trips to Antarctica. In the same year, John Kerry, the U.S. Secretary of State, flew to Antarctica during one of the most heated presidential elections in American history. Buzz Aldrin, the famous Apollo astronaut, also traveled there and had to be medically evacuated shortly after his visit. He posted a message on social media that simply said, "We are in danger." That post was later deleted. Linda Moulton Howe had been watching all of this very carefully, because several years before any of this became public, she had already been hearing things. The thing about Linda's work is that over the decades, she built a network. Retired military personnel, scientists, government contractors, people who had spent their careers being told to stay quiet and who eventually reached a point in their lives where they felt they had to talk to someone. And a significant number of those people started coming to Linda with stories about Antarctica. One of the most detailed accounts she has discussed publicly came from a man she identified only by the name Spartan 1 to protect his identity. He was a retired U.S. Navy flight engineer who told Linda that during his service in Antarctica, he had flown missions over a specific region near the South Pole, and that during one of those flights, his crew witnessed something that defied any rational explanation. He described seeing a large, perfectly circular opening in the ice, not a natural melt pool or a geological formation, a perfectly shaped entrance that appeared to go deep into the Earth below the ice sheet. He said the opening was warm, the air coming out of it was warm, and he said that his crew was immediately ordered to change course and never speak about what they had seen. This account alone would be easy to dismiss, but Linda did not just have one source. Over the years, she gathered multiple testimonies from different people with different backgrounds who had never met each other and who were describing remarkably similar things. Openings in the ice, unusual heat signatures in specific locations, and in some accounts, the witnessing of what could only be described as large, unidentified craft either entering or exiting those openings. Linda has been careful in how she presents this information. She is not someone who simply takes a story and runs with it. She cross-references, she checks backgrounds, she asks for documentation wherever possible. And what she kept finding was that the stories were consistent in ways that were very difficult to explain away. But the accounts from military personnel were only part of what Linda started uncovering. The other part was potentially even more significant, and it came from a completely different direction. Antarctica was not always frozen. This is a scientific fact. Geological and paleontological records show that millions of years ago, Antarctica had a warm climate with forests, rivers, and diverse ecosystems. But there is a more controversial idea that some researchers have been quietly investigating: the idea that Antarctica may have been home to an advanced civilization far more recently than mainstream science currently accepts. The Piri Reis map is a genuine historical document. It was created in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral named Piri Reis, and it accurately shows the coastline of Antarctica in detail. The problem is, Antarctica was not officially discovered until 1820, and the map appears to show the continent's coastline as it would look without ice, which would mean it was drawn based on source maps that are far older than anything we currently have a record of. Mainstream historians have debated this map for decades without reaching a satisfying conclusion. Linda began connecting the Piri Reis map to the testimony she was receiving from her sources. Several of her contacts described not just openings in the ice, but structures beneath the ice, large architectural forms that did not look natural. One source described what appeared to be massive walls and chambers carved into the bedrock beneath the ice sheet. Another described seeing what looked like the preserved remains of extremely large humanoid beings that had been recovered from beneath the ice and transported to secure locations. Linda refers to these as pre-Adamite findings, the idea that before any civilization we currently know about, there may have been a highly advanced culture living on Antarctica when it was still habitable, and that culture may have left far more than just ruins. Here is where things get even more complicated, because Linda's investigation did not just lead her to eyewitness testimony. It led her to the conclusion that the US government and several other world governments have known about anomalous findings in Antarctica for decades and have been actively working to keep that information away from the public. The 1959 Antarctic Treaty is a real document, signed by 12 nations initially, and now signed by over 50. The treaty designates Antarctica as a scientific preserve and bans military activity there. It also contains provisions that restrict certain types of information gathered in Antarctica from being freely published. The official reason is to ensure scientific cooperation, but Linda and others have pointed out that the treaty conveniently also prevents any independent investigation of the continent at scale. Several of Linda's sources have told her that in the years following Operation High Jump, the U.S. military conducted a series of classified follow-up expeditions to Antarctica that have never been publicly acknowledged. These expeditions reportedly focused on specific geographic coordinates near the East Antarctic region, and the findings from those expeditions were fed directly into classified programs that still exist today. In 2017, Linda released a series of videos on her Earth Files platform in which she laid out a comprehensive timeline of government activity in Antarctica connected to the testimonies she had gathered. The videos went viral in conspiracy and alternative history communities, but were largely ignored by mainstream media. Linda herself acknowledged at the time that she was putting her reputation on the line by going as public as she did with this information. She said she had spent years sitting on parts of what she knew because she wasn't sure she had enough corroboration. But by 2017, she felt she did.
The phrase Linda Moulton Howe admits what they saw has circulated in headlines and discussion forums since around 2019 and intensified again in 2023 and into 2025 as her content on Earth Files continued to draw millions of views. What Linda has consistently said in recent years is that the convergence of evidence she has gathered over decades from military insiders, scientists, and government contractors points to something extraordinary beneath the Antarctic ice. In multiple interviews and in her own published work, Linda has said directly that she believes there are non-human-made structures beneath the Antarctic ice sheet. She has said she believes some of the craft that have been observed and reported by credible military witnesses over Antarctica are connected to whatever is down there. And she has said that the level of government secrecy surrounding Antarctica is completely disproportionate to what you would expect if it was just ice and penguins. In a 2023 interview, Linda said that one of her longtime sources, a retired intelligence official, had told her that within certain classified circles, the discussion of what lies beneath Antarctica was no longer treated as speculation. It was treated as an established fact that was being managed carefully in terms of how and when and whether it would ever be disclosed to the public. This is the admission that her audience refers to. Not a dramatic single confession moment, but a cumulative and increasingly direct statement from a journalist who has spent over 40 years building sources and cross-referencing accounts, and who is now saying clearly that she believes what her sources have told her is real. The reason Linda's work on Antarctica has gained renewed attention heading into 2026 is because the broader conversation around unexplained phenomena has shifted dramatically at the official level. In 2023, former U.S. intelligence officer David Grush testified under oath before the U.S. Congress and stated that the U.S. government had in its possession non-human craft and biological materials. That testimony was not from a fringe blogger. It was given under oath in front of Congress, and it was covered by major mainstream outlets, including the New York Times and the BBC. The U.S. government did not deny the core of what Grush said. They launched an investigation. In 2024 and into 2025, multiple additional whistleblowers came forward through official congressional channels, adding further detail to the picture Grush had outlined. The American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics published a report acknowledging that unidentified aerial phenomena represented a genuine scientific question that deserved serious study. NASA formed a dedicated UAP research team. This was no longer fringe territory. Within this new environment, Linda Moulton Howe went from being someone mainstream media dismissed to being someone that serious researchers were citing. Her decades of documented interviews and sourced testimony suddenly had a different weight to them. People who had previously written her off started going back through her archives and finding that many of the things her sources had described years ago were now being confirmed or at least taken seriously at the official level. Antarctica remains a central thread in that broader conversation. Researchers point out that if non-human intelligence has been interacting with Earth for a long period of time, then Antarctica, with its ancient geology, its vast unexplored subterranean terrain, and its extraordinary government restrictions, would be a logical place to look. If this video made you think differently about Antarctica or about what governments around the world might be hiding, then hit that like button right now and make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you will never miss any of our video.